On a recent podcast, I covered my own El Camino, the Primitivo, and one thing I also talked about was how crowded the El Camino is getting these days. And so I wanted you to consider, since this is the most popular hiking trail or walking trail in the world, and so many of us have it on our list to do, some different ways that we can do the El Camino where it's a much more fulfilling trip, where it's not so crowded. And so today I've asked my friend David, who we met on the Coast to Coast Trail, to come back and talk to us about his French way, which is the most popular route, but he did things a little bit different. And stay tuned also, we might be doing a Camino together. I can't wait to share all this with you, so let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. Today we're going to be doing the Camino Francés, the most popular route of the El Camino, but we're going to do things a little bit different than most people are doing that last 100 kilometers to get the certificate, or the last 60 miles that are required in order to get the certificate that you've done the Camino. My friend David instead did the very first section, which even though he did it in the height of the busy season, in the middle of summer, it was not crowded. There's people on there, of course, but it wasn't crowded like you're going to see if you were doing that last little bit to get that piece of paper. I've been doing a lot of thinking about the El Camino, both because I've been revisiting my own as I prepared that episode for you, and also in preparing this one with my friend David, who did the French way. And I got to thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we did an Active Travel Adventures community Camino? So it'd still be self-guided, so you can kind of do your own thing, but if we did it all at the same time on the same route, so you could either hike with fellow listeners on that day or do solo and meet up in town later that night. So you can do your own Camino, but we'd still be doing it together. You'd have that support system, the instant friendships, the camaraderie of doing an El Camino instantly with people you know. So anyway, I thought that would be kind of a cool thing to look into. So if you're interested in this at all, please hit me up at kit@activetraveladventures.com and let me know, and I'll put together an email that we can kind of hash things out and see if this is a good idea or not. And we'd be looking at fall of 2024 for doing the Camino. Right now, I'm leaning towards doing the coastal way of Portugal, but right now, I'm open to ideas. Let's hear what you got to say. So again, just reach out to me at kit@activetraveladventures.com if you're interested in possibly doing the El Camino with me and other Active Travel Adventures listeners. So with that, let's get on with my interview with David. You first met David in episode 132. He was the bagpiper, and you also met him again on the Coast to Coast on the recent episode 148, where he and I walked the first half of England's Coast to Coast path. So recently did an episode of my own Camino. I did the Camino Primitivo, but I also focus as much about how crowded the Caminos have become. And you did something a little bit different than most people, because most people want to get that certificate at the last 100 kilometers. But instead, you did the start of the French way, which is the most popular way. So that's what we're going to be talking about that today. So I guess to start with, why did you go against the crowds and do the first part instead of the last part?
Well, my motivation for doing the Camino was my family were all meeting up in northern Spain that summer, and there were various ways they were going to get there by train and by boat and things. And I decided to walk. So I thought, I wonder if there's a trail. And then I hit on the fact that the trail of the Camino from San Jean de Port over to Santiago de Compostella actually went just a few miles south of where my family were meeting up. So that's why I did my Camino.
Well, that ended up being a smart thing, because you went June or July, as I recall. When did you go?
I went in the middle of July, and although that is high summer, and although there was a heat wave going on in Europe at that time, there wasn't a heat wave going on in northern Spain. It was absolutely glorious. The weather was fantastic.
Tell us about, and we're going to get a little bit more into what you saw, but tell us about how much traffic you saw on the trail there.
So I would say that there was enough people to be interesting. There were people to meet, but it was not hundreds of people. It was more like small groups you could see ahead, or one or two people, and you'd catch up with them, walk for a bit, then maybe not walk for a bit, have a coffee. There was a core group of us kept meeting up, maybe 6 or 7 that would meet up and have a beer and have something to eat at the different towns, because most people tend to stop at the same places on these trips. So it definitely wasn't crowded. It did not feel crowded at all. And the towns were very nice. The cafes were very welcoming. So yeah, my experience from that point of view was good. And I'd heard that at the other end of the Camino, when you get towards Santiago, when all the paths converge, it can be a standing room only, but it definitely wasn't like that in that first stretch.
So I did my Camino in May. So I was a little early in the season. And when my Primitivo caught up with the French way in the last couple of days, I wouldn't call it a parade, but it was pretty darn close to being a parade. And you were going at the peak season and did not hit that at all. So that's amazing. So that's another reinforcement to maybe pick your section or your timing a little bit better so you could have a really good Camino experience like you did. So let's dig a little bit deeper into what exactly you saw. So you started, Saint Jean, how do you say that again?
Saint-Jean-Pied-à-Port.
Okay. All right. So for my English spelling, I would say Saint Jean Pied de Port. So that's how it looks on the map. Right? I can never pronounce anything.
I would call that American spelling.
You made it through Pamplona, and where did you end up?
I ended up in a town called Logrono.
Okay. All right. So that's the next major town after that. And how long was your walk altogether?
I made it over 7 nights. So 6 days of walking, 7 nights.
And approximately what distance was that?
That was about 150 kilometers, 155 kilometers.
Okay. So that's just under 100 miles.
95 miles.
So that's a nice size trip. And you went with my affiliate, Follow the Camino, which I appreciate very much. And because you are a listener to Active Travel Adventures, you get to save 5% with my exclusive promo code ATA5, ATA5. So how was Follow the Camino? How did they do?
They were very good. The pre-Camino bit was fantastic. The materials were all sent to me on time. Very good communication. The actual maps and my Camino diary, which I wasn't so interested in, but the Camino diary, everything was waiting for me at the hotel in Saint-Jean when I arrived. So I had the app. I downloaded the app. My itinerary was on the app. There was a map which I could follow on the app. And right through the whole journey, I had no problems with signal or transmission. So although there was a map, I was using my phone most of the time without any difficulties. So they were very good. They picked up the bags every day at about 8. You'd left your bag downstairs in the hotel about 8. And then whenever you arrived at the other place, the bags were always there. So, and a very good experience with Follow the Camino.
And they made, of course, all of your arrangements. And I believe it's mostly 2- and 3-star accommodations. And that makes it for an affordable holiday.
It was 2- 3-star accommodation. I did not sample the albergas with the bunk beds and that kind of thing. I went into 2- 3-star hotels, all very comfortable. Yeah.
So when you look back on your experience, like what are some of your favorite impressions, be it the landscape or the people? Kind of tell us, give us a feel for what it was like to do the trail.
So first of all, Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, glorious little French town, and just fantastic weather. I mean, it was just a gorgeous start and a tremendous feeling to that. It's an old walled city, and already at breakfast in the hotel, there was somebody who was there and doing the hike. So immediately I met the people side of things. So that was great. So we breakfasted. He was going off early, and other times off he went. So I did a recce the night before to make sure I understood the route out of town, walked around the city walls a bit, really, really enjoyed that. And when I started walking out of town, within probably about half a mile, I saw a group of, I think they were Korean ladies in front. So I chatted with them for a bit. I took some pictures of them. They took some pictures of me. I was going a lot faster. So I walked on a bit, and then I met Cesar, who was a really interesting chap from Mexico. And so it went. So the people side of things was great. I never had really any long periods of time on my own. I would bump into people. We would peel together, and we'd walk together and not walk together. But we'd meet up, have drinks, and so the people side was definitely a highlight. It wasn't overwhelming. Everyone had the same goal. They were walking in the same direction. We all got to appreciate the fantastic scenery, because that was a given. When you leave Saint-Jean, you're climbing up into the Pyrenees, up to 5,200 feet, and back down into a place called Roncesvalles. on the other side, and that's just glorious. A hike up into the top, into the high peaks there, beautiful, fertile landscape. We're not talking jagged mountains here. We're talking very lived in and farmed, and woods at the top there. Nice trails through the woods. A little bit of track, a couple of bits of metalled, but no place where there's any traffic to speak of. So just a delightful walk across the hills, the Pyrenees, on the first day down to Ronces valleys, and then you just work your way through the towns of Iri and Pamplona onto Logrones, enjoying those classic Spanish vistas. You see the town on a hilltop in the distance with the church on the top of the highest point, inviting you to come and stop by and have a coffee. And sure enough, when you get into the environs of the church, there's a little cafe there, and there'll be a couple of pilgrims, stop and have a chat, have a coffee. People are always very glad to see you. Buen Camino. So a very nice experience. Landscape, people, language was fine. I had a little bit of Spanish. The most common language, of course, was English. Walked for a bit with a French lady, who I speak French, so that was okay. So yeah, great experience. People, landscape, bit of language, lovely.
Did you find that it was like people from all over the world, or what nationalities? You mentioned Mexico, you mentioned Korea, you mentioned France. Of course, you're from the UK, so was it pretty international?
It's pretty international. What happens is you tend to meet the same people, different groups and different combinations as you go each day, because you're generally walking to the same town. It starts at a certain time, and then these towns are at a distance where people tend to stay. So that group included Brits. The group that I was most close to, whether it was the Mexican guy, the French lady. There was a lady from Hungary who had done the Camino about 7 times. There was a couple, for a man and his daughter from Manchester in England, who was completely uncompromising with his Manchester accent. So I was acting as a translator. This is the Scot speaking to a Mancunian, translating into Spanish to get the conversation going. So yes, a truly international group.
Were there many Americans on the trail?
Not on that, not the trail I did. There were no Americans that I met. And that doesn't mean to say they weren't there, but they just weren't. That's not who I met.
Follow the Camino ranks it at 3 out of 4 for difficulty level. Now, going over the Pyrenees and the section you did, how hard, if you had to rank it, I usually do it out of a rating of 5, 5 being the hardest, and like climbing like something super hard. Where would you put it?
I put it 3 to 4 because it's all properly manicured trails. I mean, if you're talking other long distance paths, like in the UK, coast to coast, where you're hiking up over rocks and bare mountainside to get over passes and things, that would be a 4 or 5 because, you might twist your ankle and that kind of thing. No danger of that in the Camino. The trail's all well tracked, well signposted. People have been doing that for 1,000 years. So I would put it 3 to 4. Not saying you don't have to be fit. I mean, it's a long hike. You're doing 20, 25 kilometers a day. And one day I did 30. So, and you're doing that every day. So it's challenging from the fitness point of view, but from the footwear point of view, I was just wearing a nice pair of Mindel walking shoes. I wasn't wearing boots. Whereas on the coast to coast, for example, in England, it was definitely you were wearing hiking boots because you had to support your ankles. So I'd say 3 to 4, but you have to be a bit fit because the distances are quite long.
I'd say on anything long distance like that, it's you can do anything hard one day. It's getting up day after day and telling your body, oh, you got to do it again. Then you wake up again. Oh, I got to do it again. It's really hard to get your body conditioned. You just don't want to start doing this. You really should train ahead of time.
I have a tip for that, actually.
What's that?
Which I've shared with the trailers, hikers. Of course, the training, and I've seen on your website advice about walking and training and things, but something I found, and it worked for me, by training and doing a couple of walks, even if you just go into a grocery store and decide to walk the long way back, 5 or 6 miles, 7 miles, whatever, and with your boots on that you're going to wear on the trail, just look at your feet. And you will find that there will be at least some point or other on your foot which is slightly red or just slightly chafed. Normally you wouldn't think anything of it. But I guarantee you that on a Camino, that's the spots you're going to have blisters on eventually. I have not met a Camino person who didn't have blisters at some point or other. And what I did was I sort of equalized before the other team scored, as it were. I put blister plasters on those spots that I knew where my feet were sensitive. So I didn't have any issues at all. And so I had put the corn pads on and the blister pads on before I had the blisters, because I knew where they were going to occur, because I'd done the training. I looked at my feet and seen where the red spots were and the slightly irritant spots in the back of the heel or whatever. And I just put a plaster there or a corn pad or something. And that's a tip I've shared with others, which hopefully will help people not to have this problem of blisters, which is one of the most common things that people complain about on Camino.
Fortunately, I don't suffer from blisters, but I think one reason is I always get my shoes like a half a size too large, because you forget that your feet are going to expand and get larger, and that's what's going to cause some of those pressure points that may not happen in the store when you're trying them on. So I would recommend for people to consider doing that. And again, doing what you said is excellent advice, because if your feet hurt, everything hurts. And when he says, what did you call them? Plasters. That would be something like the Compeed is what we would call it here in the US. It's a little bit stronger than a Band-Aid, and they don't come off. They stick on.
That's it. Yeah, they'll still be on after your shower the next day. Maybe in a couple of days you change them out again, but look after your feet.
For sure. Excellent advice. All right, let's talk about one of my favorite subjects, food. How is the food along the trail?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. Really enjoyed it. You're in the very Basque kind of country in the northern part of Spain there. Lots of tapas, pinchos to eat. I don't think I had a bad meal the whole time. There was always an opportunity, and potato, what was it called again? The tostado potato. Great breakfast thing. They'd have a breakfast of, the usual continental breakfast in the hotel. You'd walk for a bit, and then you'd find a cafe in one of these towns and stop in or something. If you want a coffee or potatoes. Some places, the trail thing said that they might have to walk for 15 kilometers or 15 miles or so before you got to another cafe. But even in the longest stretches where there wasn't necessarily a town, there were pop-up vans would appear. Just when you really wanted them, there'd be a pop-up van there selling potatoes and snacks and coffee and things. So the towns were great from the point of view of having nice restaurants to eat in. But when you're on the trail, there was always an opportunity to grab a coffee or to get something to eat. And you never went very long before there'd be an opportunity to eat something or have coffee. We're not talking about a corner Starbucks every time you turn a corner in the wood, but certainly there were places to eat en route, which I found great. And again, you'd be the pilgrims there, and you'd be sitting chatting, and you catch up with folk, and people would be talking about their day and what they'd seen and whatnot. So yeah, food very, very good. Both main food at the towns that you stop at, but also the opportunity to snack and find coffees along the way.
Great. And that's a very big difference from my Primitivo, which is not as developed. The French way is the most popular way. I believe like 2/3 of all pilgrims, which is what you call the people walking El Camino, do the French way. And so you have a better infrastructure set up. And I didn't even know about the little food trucks or vans setting up as well. I would sometimes not see a cafe until I got to my night stop. So I could be all day without seeing a little village. Or if I went to a village, everything was closed. So that is a big difference between your Camino and my Camino. And that sounds good. And so you're in France to start with. How long were you in France before you hit the Basque Country?
I'd landed in the Basque Country. I flew to Biarritz, and I spent a couple of nights exploring the coast around Biarritz, which is a nice French. It would have been a resort back in the early part of the 20th century, kind of upmarket resort place. Very nice. coastline. So I started in Biarritz, spent a couple of nights there, and then a simple train connection from close to Biarritz over to Saint-Jean, and that was the start of Camino Frances. So just one night in France, 2 nights in Biarritz, 1 night in Saint-Jean, and then you walk across the border. Well, actually, you go along the border for a bit, but eventually you cross into Spain, and the rest of the trail is in Spain. Where the first town you come to, a place called Roncesvalles.
Nice. So we talked a little bit about footwear, and what are there any other special things that you should bring? Do you need hiking sticks? Any special attire or suggestions or advice there?
Well, I would recommend hiking sticks, because walking is a dynamic motion. Your foot's going down heavily onto the ground, or your body weight, and if you've got poles, every time you put a pole and engage with the path, you're taking weight off your knees. And so it just lessens the wear and tear in your body, your knees, as you do these 20 so kilometers per day. And I noticed that everyone was walking with everyone. That's not strictly true. There was one Korean girl I saw walking without poles and flip-flops. Every time I saw her, she was sitting in a pile crying and worried about her feet being really sore and things. So I would not recommend that.
For sure.
Most people had poles. I very cleverly had forgotten the poles that I had and bought myself a pole. There's a couple of very good pole shops and pole shops in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. So I got myself kitted out with some poles, I think at 35 euros or something like that. But highly recommended. For walking anyway, any of these long distance trails, I'd recommend having poles and using them almost aggressively, using the arms as part of the motion. For a start, it keeps your upper body in good shape as well, but also it's just reducing the wear and tear in your knees in a long day. And after several days of walking, I think it makes a big difference. I've been using them for 20 years now.
Any other special item that you pack that you're like, oh, that was a good idea to bring that people might not think about?
Well, I was doing this in July, so I wasn't expecting there to be any snowdrifts up on the top of the Pyrenees. But it did, there was a mist, there was a short spell when it was wet. So make sure you've got a nice lightweight rain jacket for sure, and a couple of layers jumper, just in case you feel a bit cool. Only in that first day, because after that we were dropping down. And then the average temperature would be about 20 from in the evenings, 20 to 25. So I don't think, unlike again to compare with coast to coast, say in the UK or some of the other mountainous trails that you have in Europe, you're not going up and spending long distance at high altitude. I've done trekking in the Alps, for example, when I would take heavy duty fleeces and layered cagoles and hats. You need a sun hat, of course, sunglasses, but it's not a gentle stroll. It's a good exercise. We scored it at 3 or 4 out of 5, simply because you're walking that distance every day, but not really special. I was wearing shorts the whole time, very comfortable.
Would you say most of the path was on trails per se, or are they rural roads, or describe the trail conditions or what they were like?
So I would say about the only part where you were mainly on roads was round about the centre of Pamplona. It's a big town, and the trail goes right through Pamplona, and there's no getting around the fact that you end up sharing a bit of the road to get into Pamplona and through the town and out the industrial estates and the other side. So that's a bit of that. So there was probably about 4 or 5 kilometers of that round about Pamplona. In general, it would be what in the UK I'd have called minor roads, if there was a road. And very often it wasn't a road at all. It was just a path going through the woods or go through the fields or whatever. So couple of stretches, as I say, when you did walk along the road, the roads weren't terribly busy. You're not walking along autostradas or anything like that. But in the main, it's country lanes and minor roads a lot of footpaths that have just evolved over the years. And very occasionally, when you go into a big town, you're just stuck with going in past the industrial estate that inevitably happens outside of town.
Was the trail well marked?
Oh yeah, no problems at all. No problems at all. Either with full posts with the shell on them, the Camino shell. And it seemed to me that every time there was a debate or you were thinking, should I go left or right, someone would have painted the famous yellow arrow pointing in the direction you had to go on. So I didn't feel anxious at any time that I may have lost the trail. So it's very well signposted, but it's very well. I would always take a map anyway.
And you had the app too as a backup that would have a map on it?
Oh, yes.
No, but the app that was on your phone, that also had the map. So that told you where you were exactly anyway. So you had all these different backups between a paper map, the looking for the symbols on the trail, as well as an app. Perfect. So you went solo. Do you see any issues with people going solo on a Camino?
None whatsoever. No. And even when I had a minor accident in my Camino, when I managed to trip up and fall, there was people around to help. And the local health people were very good. I had a doctor appointment very quickly, managed to get reassured that I hadn't broken anything, and carried on and finished the hike. So as a solo traveler, I wouldn't have any anxiety about that at all. You're not in an isolated part of the country. There'll always be someone coming by. Now, this is seasonal, of course. I mean, you're at that high part of the Pyrenees, that first part of the Pyrenees does go up quite high. And imagine if you're doing it in October or November, you always have to be cognizant of the season you're doing it in. But I didn't see any issues. A lot of people were doing it on their own. Couples were doing it, of course. Friends were doing it. So, but it's certainly something you could tackle on your own. You're going between towns with infrastructure. You're not staying in the bush. Or at least I wasn't. So I think it'd be a nice one. That part of the route would be nice to do. And you could easily do that on your own and feel quite secure.
And I think too, if you're going solo on that popular of a trail, you can either choose to stay solo, or there's so many people that you could walk with others as you so chose each day. Kind of thing.
Absolutely. I will say that the trail I did, it wasn't that busy. I mean, there were people, and there was never any point when I wasn't aware in the far distance of someone or behind me someone, but I wasn't like 4 steps behind people going step, which I think you were describing was a bit like that getting into Santiago. When you finished your Camino, there was just everyone and their uncle were walking the trail.
And tell us a little bit more about the landscapes that you saw.
So it starts, you're at probably about 2,500 feet at Saint-Jean. So it's already quite, it's hilly. You're in the foothills of the Pyrenees. You're going up through farmland, lots of cattle, and in the initial part, animals around. In the highest part, you're going up through trees. You're above the cultivated area. You're walking through the trees. You're seeing distant vistas. You're looking down valleys to the left or to the right. Very impressive. Felt very comfortable landscape. It didn't feel remote or that I've seen hiking in other places like the Himalayas or in the Alps. So that first day or so was just wonderful, walking through the Pyrenees. And once you're off the Pyrenees, and the trek I did out to Logrono, so you're just going gentle ups and downs through valleys, mainly farmland, sometimes cornfields, sometimes sunflowers, sometimes olive groves, different types of things. As you walk along these hills in the distance, you suddenly see a town, and that's where you're heading for, with a nice church on the top, and the streets all cascading down in houses. So that's always a great photographic thing. You find yourself photographing that every 4 steps, a bit closer, until you to walk into the town. So that landscape up there is just it's all cared for. The towns are all immaculate. They turned out. I don't know what I was expecting, but the paths through the towns were all beautifully maintained. People had flowers out in their window ledges. There was no potholes. If you come from England, you're worried about potholes just going round the corner from the street that you live in, but didn't see any evidence of that at all. Well cared for footpath that was well maintained. The roads, the minor roads that you walked on, you're very well maintained. The towns were immaculately clean and very presentable. So it's just a very, very nice countryside, lived in, well-loved countryside. That's what it felt like to me, walking throughout that entire trail.
And the way you describe this, I mean, it sounds like a great adventure for anyone, but it also sounds like a perfect first adventure for somebody that wants to dip their toes into adventure travel, because you have the, I'll say the safety net of having people around you. You have the self-guided tour. You have Follow the Camino holding your hand to kind of make sure you know what you're doing, yet you're actually out having a nice adventure, but in a somewhat controlled but very beautiful environment. Plus, you're doing a Camino, which is how cool is that?
That's pretty cool. And you could have done the next section, another 8 days. The whole Camino, I think, is about nearly 4 weeks. So I think you've summed it up very well. That if you want to be an adventure traveler, probably on your own, then I would say that would be a very nice, that particular trek I did would be a good first experience of doing that kind of thing. You get the benefits of the people side, meeting people, the landscape side, the physical challenge, because it's not 10 kilometers or 5 miles a day. It's more like 10 miles a day or 15 miles a day. So it's physically challenging, but very doable. Very doable. So yeah, I think you've put that very well. It's a good first adventure travel on your own type of thing to do.
Now, you've been all over the world. You've hiked in some magnificent places. How did this particular hike compare to some of the other places that you went?
Oh boy, that's a good question. It's just so contrasting. I mean, in the last year, I've hiked in the high Alps, for example, staying in refugios, and you're walking over very rough terrain and with fantastic glaciers above you, below you, around you, huge jagged mountains, and that's an experience. That's one type of hiking experience. But what I'm describing, this gentle, challenging first day going over the Pyrenees, but this well-loved countryside, well-tended, that's also very therapeutic, very relaxing, and people have got a purpose for doing it. So it compares very well. I wouldn't say, oh, it was just a dawdle, because it wasn't. I mean, I was walking for 20, 25 kilometers, 12 to 18 miles a day. So it has that element of challenge, but and because the countryside was so nice, the villages there, the occasional pop-up van selling coffees or whatever it is, that just had a really nice feel to it. So it was not better, just different to some of the higher altitude things I've done, or the more remote treks like in England and the highest part of the Lake District and the coast to coast, or going up parts of the Highlands of Scotland, where bits of it can be a bit more remote. They've got their own excitement and interest, but this trail, I think it's this idea that there's probably only 10 or 15 brilliant days you have in your entire life, and probably one of the days from that Camino would fit into, which is lovely, that day walking over the Pyrenees, and so yeah, it ranks well, but it's not equivalent to, but it just, in its own way, it's just a nice thing to do.
And there's a certain camaraderie too that I think is special to the Camino, that's a little bit different than some of the other walking holidays I've been on. You all seem to bond on the walking holidays, but there's it's almost like you have this common goal thing on a Camino, which is it's just a little bit different, I thought. in a good way.
You're right, because uniquely, there's a purpose. People have been doing this since the 8th or 9th century. In fact, I think there were probably 1 million people a year doing it back in the 13th century. It's just this is incredible. The stories are told of it's this long history, because St. James had one of Jesus' disciples had done some of his ministry over in that part of Spain near Santiago. He came back to Rome, and he fell foul of Agrippa, the emperor at the time, was executed. But other people who had shared the ministry with him, so the story goes, took his bones back across to Santiago, and they were found apparently in a beach covered with shells. This is why you've got the Camino shell as the hallmark of the Camino trek. And people built, first of all, a small shrine and a bigger shrine, and that became a well-known in medieval times a place to communicate with God, and through one of the exact apostles, one of the 12 apostles of Jesus. His bones reputedly are in this casket at Santiago de Compostella. So hundreds of thousands of people, kings and queens, and over the years, people would walk that trail to find spiritual fulfillment. So it is a very special thing. It's not just a route, which was like a cattle drover's route from the past or something like that. This was a major deal, route focusing down to see this St. James relic in Santiago, which makes it special. And a lot of people do it for religious reasons, but not everybody. There were people there, one chap just bonding with his daughter, thought this would be a great thing to do before his daughter left to go to university. Lots of people with significant birthdays, 40 or 50 or 60, wanting to do something different, have a bit of a challenge, couples having a celebration. But the purpose is everyone's doing the same direction. There's not people coming at you. People are always going from A to B, and there's not many times in life that everyone's walking the same direction and heading to do the same thing. So that creates a bond. So you have something to talk about. Buen camino. That's what you say when you meet everyone. There's only one reason why people are on that trail. They'll walk to Santiago. So it is rather special from that point of view.
Definitely. Well, David, I appreciate you coming on with me today and sharing your experiences. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us before I let you go?
I would say just if you sample it, the thought would be you probably get hooked on it. I did meet people who have done that particular Camino lots and lots of times, and you probably want to explore other things. And once you've shown yourself that you can do it, you'll probably want to do it again. But no, if you have a thought and want to have an experience of hiking and you'll experience culture, history, good companionship, good food, wonderful landscape, lots of laughs, then yeah, follow the Camino. Why not?
Sounds great. Thank you, David.
My pleasure.
I hope you've enjoyed learning about the French Way Camino as an alternative to doing your El Camino in a less rush, crowded way, so that you get the full experience of the El Camino that you're expecting to get. I've covered the Camino many, many times on the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'll put links in the show notes to the page that lists them all so that you can poke around and see which one's the right one for you. And of course, with all the travel planners, if you get my monthly newsletter, you'll know the right months to go to do each one. You can always reach me at kit@activetraveladventures.com and ask to be put on the monthly email list. And remember, I don't spam or sell your name or anything. And with that, you'll get access to all the travel planners that I put together in this last 6+ years. So there's quite a bit of helpful free information for you to help you plan your next adventure. Also, if you're listening to this in 2023 or 2024, remember this is evergreen, so you might be listening to this years from now, I am considering doing an El Camino as a group outing with you guys. So if you are interested in this at all, don't forget to email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com or click the link in the show notes and let me know, and I'll put you on the list. And as we develop this plan to see if we're going to do that, I'll keep you updated on plans to see if it's something you'd like to do. Love to have you join us. With that, let's sign off. I really appreciate you listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.